and acceptance of that. So welcome everyone to the Financial Security for All community of practice training for your money, your goals. We are excited to be partnering with our friends from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. I'm Dr. Laura Hendricks here with the University of Arkansas System Division of Agriculture Cooperative Extension Service. I'm the state specialist in personal finance and consumer economics. And I wanted to give a little shout out to our Zoom producers who are running this series for us, Samantha Barker and Andrea Price. And also to our extension educators who are going to be helping out this week. So we have, again, today presenting from CFPB, we have Cassie Russell and Jill Wheeler. And then joining us today as our extension educator is Dr. Pam Pruitt, who is one of our county educators here in Arkansas. So welcome everyone, and I'll turn it over to Cassie and Jill.
Thank you so much, Laura, and thank you all for being here. So as we get started today, tell us in the chat your name and where you're from. If you're new, welcome, that's okay. So today we are going to look at some tools and resources in the suite of Your Money, Your Goals tools and handouts. And before we get started, we wanted to let you know a couple of things. One, Laura mentioned this, but just in case you just joined, today's session is being recorded. And two, all the information that Jill and I share today are our own views and may not represent the Bureau's views. And nothing we share today is legal interpretation, guidance, or advice from the Bureau. We also want to note that we might at times share third-party links to resources, and it's important to note that there are many resources, products, and services in the marketplace that might meet your needs and the needs of the people that you serve. So today we are going to dive in and talk about tracking income, spending, and making budgets. And we are going to use tools from the toolkit, the companion guides, and some of the booklets. And I'm also going to add back in the chat that materials menu that has links to everything we're going to use. And it also has a crosswalk where you can see which tools are in the toolkit and which are in booklets. So if you see in the chat, you should see a red Adobe icon. And if you hover over that, it'll say to the right-hand side in light gray text, click to open. And that will allow you to download that resource. And we're also going to create, our friends, Laura and Samantha, are going to help us out and create a box link, which we will share next session, where we'll put all of the materials that you can access throughout the series. So I see lots of introductions in the chat. Thank you all so much for being here. Hopefully you were with us last time, but welcome if you're new, and nice to see where you all are dialing in from. So we're going to jump right in. And first we want to talk about income and benefits. And the reason we start with tracking is because a lot of people might not actually know what's coming in. So when we have income, we have different types of income: regular, irregular, seasonal, one-time. So we like to just go through some examples. So what's a regular type of income? How do people normally get that? Tell us in the chat. A paycheck. Yep. Social Security. Hey, yeah. Direct deposit. That's a way that somebody could get that regular income, but generally that's W-2 employed people. We see an annuity, right? Sometimes retirement. Great. Benefits are a regular source of income. Yeah, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And what's a regular income that people might have? Yep, odd jobs, tips, I worked retail for a long time, that your hours get cut and added to. Child support, if the person's not paying regularly, certainly. Then we might have seasonal employment. So if somebody is working in a cyclical environment like agriculture, if they have a job around the holidays, maybe at a pumpkin patch or a Christmas tree farm or a seasonal store, and then one-time occurrence, right? So inheritance, a bonus. I see lottery if, if you're lucky. Somebody said rental income, great. So benefits are a little bit different than income, and that usually they're limited in purpose. So some states do have general assistance or cash assistance. We're seeing a rise in universal basic income programs, but generally, SNAP is for food. A housing voucher is for housing. And so we still want people to account for this in their budgets, but to plan around how they can use those. And we're going to jump in and look at our first tool. So you'll see in the top right, oh, thanks so much, Jill. Jill added the link to the tool for download in the chat. And you can see in the top right that this is in the toolkit. And all of our tools have very simple instructions. So here, the person's going to gather their pay stubs, benefit statements, and any electronic records, and they're going to enter in the amount of income and benefits that they receive. So on the left-hand side, you'll see job 1, job 2, child support, disability, SNAP, TANF, other government programs, and other. And then the tool, if you use the electronic version that Jill just shared, will actually total. And we also help people identify what net income is. And this is really important because if somebody starts budgeting with their gross income, they're going to be quite disappointed. So it just provides a little information about what net income is in the event that somebody is unfamiliar with that. So in addition to tracking income, we've heard that this tool can be useful in another way. Any ideas about how you could use the list of income sources on the left? Any ideas? We've heard from some folks that this is a way to open up a conversation about benefits and make sure that somebody is receiving the benefits that they're entitled to. So to ask, do you get SNAP? Do you get TANF? What about local programs or other government programs? So this can help open up a conversation about ways of potentially bringing in more income and benefits. So now, to explore options, exactly. So now we're going to look at the version of this tool that's in the Behind on Bills booklet. So if you have a paper copy, it's the one with the polar bear. And just in case you weren't with us last time, the booklets are designed for in-person use. So we won't have a link in the chat to join, for you to look at the tool, to join. But this, again, starts with what you'll need. So really similar here. And then it starts with a coaching question. So how many sources of income do you have to get somebody thinking about that as they look at the next page? And this is very similar. Here, there's more options for additional. So government program is, all kind of combined. And then we want to look at the weekly amounts. And we'll get into why we look at weekly shortly, but this is just another version that you can use to help people track their income. And it's important to note, while both of these track monthly, we do have people who might need to do it more frequently if they have a lot of fluctuation in income, or complete it week by week to really keep up rather than looking back on the month. Some people might choose to keep receipts or things like that at the start of a month. So there's different ways that you can use this tool, either proactively or retroactively with the folks that you're talking with. And we also know that a lot of you work with folks who have been or are currently incarcerated. And so in Focus on Reentry, we have this tool, Understanding Your Pay Stub. And so it walks somebody through what is FICA, what is your state tax, retirement, deductions, your net pay, in a really visual way. And we've also heard from folks, while this is in Focus on Reentry, that this is really helpful when maybe somebody's had a career gap, if somebody's receiving disability and they're returning to the workforce, or for young people who maybe haven't had a W-2 job before. So we just wanted to note that this is a tool that you might use in the conversation on tracking incomes, that somebody can really understand their net income and where all those deductions come from. So I'm going to turn it over to Jill and our guest speaker, Pam. So Jill, over to you.
Thanks so much, Cassie, and everyone. It's great to see so many of you back today and a few new names and faces as well. I'm really excited to jump into a few concrete examples of how these tools are used in the field. And later in the Q&A section and throughout the series, we want to continue to encourage people to share their experiences, share tips and ideas, because we know so many of you have been creative in adapting these types of materials to different audiences and using them in your work. So for now, we would like to hear directly from Dr. Pamela Pruitt, who will share a little bit about her experiences using the Your Money, Your Goals tools. She is a consumer sciences agent, a family and consumer sciences agent working in Mississippi County, and works with the University of Arkansas System Division of Agriculture Cooperative Extension Service. So Pam, we would love to hear a little more about your role, what you've done, and how you have used these tools and materials with the people you work with. I'll turn it over to you. Thanks.
Thanks, Jill. And hello, everybody. And I have a little bit of a cold, so I hope you'll bear with me. I love this program. I love these resources and materials. I'm learning how to use, we refer to everything as a program, but I'm learning how to use them in a program format with different audiences. So, and I'll mention this real quick about the income tracker, since that was a question in the chat. The income tracker is so good because, as was mentioned, when you get into looking at the debts and when they come due, then you put that together. So if you have everything coming due the 15th of the month, but your income is spread out through the month, then that may be creating some problems. So all the tools can work together, but you kind of have to do everything one step at a time. So I'll just jump in on how I've used it and am using it. So Your Money, Your Goals, we were introduced to it in Arkansas by Dr. Laura Hendricks, and she created some trainings for us. And so we used Your Money, Your Goals, and primarily this was during the time when people weren't meeting. So we were primarily doing Zooms. So I did some lunch and learn Zooms with, and I just advertised through our community college. They're one of my community partners, and they have a Department of Community Ed. So I did it through them. So I divided it up into different sessions. I pretty much followed the modules, but I thought some of the modules needed more time than one lunch and learn. So especially the debt one, I broke it up into 2 sessions. And the groups were very small. And so we were able to have a lot of discussion in the chat. And also sometimes people would unmute and talk. And what I had to do was, since we weren't meeting in person, I would send all of the tools to them by email. But I also had some that wanted hard copies. So I worked it out with them. I said, if you prefer to have hard copies, let me know. And so I mailed those out, and I would try to print all those and mail them out ahead so they could have them while we're going through the class. And that was primarily the way I did it. I did an evaluation, and the evaluations were pretty good. Of course, I wanted to find the ways to improve. So that was, those were smaller groups. And then I did it for the Arkansas Department of Health. And they told me the topics they wanted. And so those were lunch and learn Zooms too. And they were an hour each time, and there were only 3. And Megan Wells, who's on here, hi Megan, so glad you're back. And she did such a super job, and she'd already covered a lot. So that's why I sent out topics to see what they really wanted to do. But they had so many topics, and it was so much material to cover that it was a challenge. But I did send out all the tools related to those modules that I was covering. And the income tracker is one of the main ones. You really need to use that, because you can't really make a budget if you don't know what your income is, and then of course your expenses and everything else. And a lot of people commented I did an evaluation, but those numbers were huge, and Zooming with huge numbers is really hard, especially when some people came one session, but they didn't come to the other one. And but I did an evaluation, and most of the comments were positive, and the comments were very positive about the tools. People really were glad to get the tools, and they found those very, very helpful. So even if your presentation may be a little lacking, your tools are great. So just share those tools. But anyway, it went well. Overall, it was really, really good. Now I'm working with face-to-face in the Northeast Arkansas Community Correction Center, and I have 24 enrolled, and we're doing a series using primarily the re-entry guide and then the tools that were designed, the tools that are in the guide itself, and then those little companion booklets, and I'm using those as well. And I call it my pilot. They're all my pilots. First time I do anything is a pilot. The second time is the second pilot. And the third time, I hope I'm getting it right. So anyway, I'm on my pilot, and I'm trying to figure out what's really working well. But I can't bring in, I can bring in handouts. I can bring in paper handouts, and I can bring in the booklets. I did order the ones that were wrapped, so I could hand those to them. And I do an evaluation each time, and they want a certificate every time. They don't want to wait to the end. They want it each time, and they love their certificate. So that's another thing you can think about with your groups is they do often, or individuals, I found that even individuals like getting a certificate, and I did that. I didn't do it with the big Zoom groups, because that ended up being 461 people over 3 sessions. So that was through an agency, and they hosted and they collected the data and all that kind of thing. And some data I got and some I didn't, but I got enough to get feedback. So with my correction center people, they love getting those certificates, and they love the handouts. They absolutely love the tools, and they ask a lot of questions, and then I try to go back and look up. So I was really happy to see that you had that ask question thing, because if I can't find it, I have to contact Dr. Laura, and she helps me out. So those are just been my experiences currently, and I just can't brag enough on how wonderful these materials are. See, I call everything a program. Sorry. These tools are, and I think it's great to share how we're using them with different. Of course, I'd love to have more audience, but we're just going to keep working on that part of it. So thanks for allowing me to share.
Thank you so much. It's really helpful. And we always learn so much from hearing more about how people use these materials with a wide variety of audiences. And we're always interested in feedback. So thank you, Cassie had put in the chat. Please do email us if you're using these and have suggestions about how to improve them or needs changes in content or format. And as we talk more about the range of budgeting tools and resources, I wanted to also give you a little bit of insight into the thinking that went into the design of some of these tools. So in a moment, Cassie will take us through the more detailed cash flow tracker. I'll just highlight. So far we've heard about the income tracker. Now I'll highlight the spending tracker. Each of these are the building blocks to looking at a person's flow and budget through the month. So the spending tracker, I think as we sit down with someone or are working with others, each of these tools has a question in the bottom right, to sort of spark the conversation. So one question that we often start with is, how much do you think you spent last month? And if I ask that to each of you or to myself, as I think back, I'm not quite so sure that the number that would come out of my mouth would kind of match what I see on my credit card statement or checkbook, because we often have our own ways of, tracking what we like to track and kind of forgetting about some of those expenses that we weren't so proud of at the time. And so the spending tracker, the goal here is really to help a person look back or go through the process of really keeping track of what they spend in a month. Look at the spending by category, identify areas to cut back on or become more aware of, maybe changes in prices with inflation or shifting costs. Budgets are changing rapidly these days. And then in this process, work to set a realistic goal to keep on track. So let's go on to the next slide, please. And I want to emphasize something here that is really woven throughout all of the materials. So if you see, we have a list of icons here, from a cell phone to debt payment, a pizza for eating out. There's a lot of thought and testing that actually went into how these tools are designed and presented. So one is, in general, we try to use, icons, symbols that are pretty easily accessible across cultures, across people with limited education or reading capacity. We have heard even more today about certain materials that might have a language that's a little too advanced. For example, the reentry guide, we may want to simplify a bit of that language, or you all in using those materials may find your own ways to adapt to the best language of the person you're serving. But here, 2 points I want to emphasize. One, and I'll ask a quick question, is why do you think cell phone is listed first in this tracker? Does anybody have an idea why that would come before debt or eating out? Any guesses? We see other expenses, education and childcare, helping others, pets, transportation. And it is one of those. I see one comment, everyone will have this expense. We try to capture the wide range of expenses that anyone might have and leave a little room for others that might be unique to a person's situation or not applicable to everyone. And I do see Ryan and Samantha, a couple of you have noted alphabetical. And so that is, you'll see these are listed in alphabetical order. So cell phone comes first because it starts with a C. It doesn't mean it's more important or more significant than any other expense in this list. And what we really want to highlight here is that these conversations and these tools are designed to reflect the range of experiences, costs, and priorities a person might encounter, but not give any value saying this is more important than that. And so depending on the audience, you may be serving people with very different priorities, values, needs, And the goal is to help them, these goals are designed to help them lay out the cost and expenses, so then they can look back and say, does this align with my own values or priorities? How does this help me get to where I want to go given my situation? And as practitioners, we all try to keep our judgment out of it and understand people may be coming with very different reasons of why one category is more important to them at this given time in their life. So let's go on to the next slide. And, just to emphasize, throughout these materials, we try to make them, and the language used and the conversations around non-judgmental approaches to making money decisions. So here, the bill calendar helps, again, lay out on paper, help a person think about, when do you pay your bills? Do you pay them on time? How do you feel about that? And how can the timing of the expenses and bills, how might that affect additional costs such as late fees, or help remember when bills are coming up, and think about the weeks when you have the most money coming in or the most money going out. So next slide, please, Cassie. And the bill calendar, very, very simple tool. We'll talk later about co-branding of some of these materials. We, certainly there's space to customize. We can talk more about co-branding later in the session, but a really basic tool to help people lay out and really look at the flow of money in any given month and look at the timing of those expenses. And one of the interesting tips we see is sometimes as people look at the dates, they may find that they're used to paying something in the first week of the month, but they might have more flexibility than they realize to adjust that date. It might be negotiating with the credit card company to adjust the timing of their monthly statement. It might be discussing with the landlord if in their situation there's some flexibility to break a single payment into 2 payments every month. A lot of variation, but this really helps to lay out the options that are available to a person. And now I will turn back to Cassie to dive into the cash flow.
Thanks so much, Jill. Okay, so we've worked to use the tools to know what somebody has coming in and what they have going out. And I asked, what are some questions you can ask after someone totals their expenses? And Alicia shared, where do you think you can cut back? And that's the perfect follow-up question because it has them come up with the solution, right? Because we all have different money values, maybe something is really important to somebody else that's not to you, and that really allows them to identify where they might want to cut back. So now we're going to put this together into a cash flow budget. So how is a cash flow different from a regular budget? Any guesses or ideas you can share in the chat? How is it different from a regular budget? And I'm going to put the link to the tool we're going to use in just a second in the chat. Okay, well, we will find out how it's different together shortly. Yeah, it's what you're actually earning and what you're spending. Yeah, a cash flow is real time and it accounts for timing. So that's really, yep, thanks so much, Barb. That's really the biggest difference. So sometimes people might be frustrated. They sit down, they complete a budgeting worksheet, they have $1,000 in income and $1,000 in expenses, but every time a utility bill is due, they don't have the money to pay for it. And so this helps somebody really look at timing of income and expenses and to make some of those adjustments. It does take more time, and we're going to walk through a scenario, and then we're going to look at another method of budgeting, and then have you all talk amongst yourselves about when you might use each one, because there's no right or wrong answer. So I put the link in the chat, and this tool is in the Financial Empowerment Toolkit, so in the larger toolkit. And we're going to walk through it with a scenario. So this person, his name's Raphael. He has 2 kids and he's often late on his bills. So it's you all get a nice little shout out in this example that we use all the time. So he's taking a parenting class with Cooperative Extension, and he's working on a cash flow budget. And we're going to look at this and see some ways he can potentially make changes to feel less stressed. So first, Raphael earns $14.65 an hour, and he works 40 hours a week. He's paid every other week, and we rounded his net pay to $1,000 for the purposes of this scenario. So where do we see this in the cash flow? Where do we see that income from his job? Tell me in the chat. Where do we see his income? Yep, great. So it is in this job 1 in week 2 and week 4, we see both that $1,000. He also has a part-time job, as many people have to work multiple jobs to try to make ends meet, and he's paid $200 a week from that job. So that one we see under week 2 spread across 200, 200, 200, 200. We do have a week 5 because some months have a week 5, but here we're working with a month with just 4 weeks. He also receives food assistance of $400. Where is that at in the income section of the cash flow? Where do we see that food assistance? Yep, in week 1 in SNAP. So let's say he gets it on the 5th of each month, and that can vary. So it's important that people are finding out when they're getting that benefit. So we've added the money that he receives each week. And now we want to look at his expenses. So he has a cell phone of $80 due in week 3. For his debt payment, which is next, he pays $250 for his student loan. So maybe he has a private loan, and so he's been paying all throughout the pandemic. He pays $250 for his car payment in week 3, plus $100 for minimum payment on his credit card. And then in week 4, he has a personal loan. His grandmother lent him money to cover some expenses for the children, and he's been paying that back. Then we see each week he eats out with his children, $25 each time. They go to a local spot every Friday after childcare pickup. He has a copay for childcare. It's $50, it's sliding scale. And so he receives a significant discount for that after school care. And then he spends $100 each week on groceries and $25 in week 2 for supplies like cleaning supplies, toilet paper. And he pays $800 for housing, which is subsidized, and it includes his electric, gas, water, sewer, and garbage. But in week 3, there's $20 for internet. He is on a plan to provide access to young people living in low-income households, and an additional $60 for cable. Then if we keep looking at his expenses, we also see some transportation and other expenses. So he spends $60 a week on gas and $175 a week in auto insurance, or a month in auto insurance. So where do we see that show up in the cash flow? $60 a week on gas and $75 a month, or $175 for auto insurance. Where does that show up? Yep, in week 2. So that's the difference. So it can be a little tricky once those expenses start to get combined. People might want to use the other category, but here he also spends $50 per week for a family membership to the Y and swimming lessons that are an activity for all of his children. Okay, so looking at this, when does Raphael run out of money? Where do we see that he first gets into trouble? Yeah, week 1. So he ends up with negative $185. And then exactly again in week 3, he ends up with negative $315. But we see in week 2 and week 4, he has a surplus, right? He has an extra $280 and an extra $500 at the end of the month. So how could he adjust some of his expenses in week 1 to try to make ends meet? What are some things that he could consider? So this is week 1, and he was short $180. Save money from the overage week, see if he could change the due dates. Yeah, see if his landlord would maybe accept 2 equal payments for rent, or a $600 payment and a $200 payment. He could see if his student loan could be moved. So we have that here. So in week 3, that's one idea of how he could make ends meet, moving that student loan payment. What else could he do in week 3 to try to make ends meet? He's at negative $315 there. Another idea is trying to move his auto loan payment. So this just really helps somebody visualize when they could potentially move bills. And again, this is different because in a cash flow, we're able to see the shortfall by week, because if he were to do a regular budget, this wouldn't come up. Okay, so this seems like a lot of work, but we want to highlight that in order to develop the cash flow budget, you can copy this information from other tools. So we're not going to spend too much time on this today, but just the income and benefits tracker is in module 3, the spending tracker is in module 4, cutting expenses is in module 4 as well. And then you can use your SMART goals, planning for life events and large purchases, and some other tools to decide what can be cut, reduced, and eliminated, as well as integrating savings goals. So just want to highlight that you don't have to start all over. The tool can feel pretty overwhelming just sitting down with it. So helping people realize that they already have a lot of this information if they've done the spending tracker and the income tracker. Yeah, great. So somebody said that this would be useful for people who rely on farm income. So if you can tell us more about how that would be useful, that would be really helpful. I know cash flow has been really helpful for me. I'm 1099 is how I get paid. And so income varies and changes and all that good stuff, much like somebody working in the gig economy. So Jill put the link to the monthly budget, and this is from Focus on People with Disabilities, but much like the paycheck tool, we know that it's very useful for a lot of audiences who are looking for a budget instead of a cash flow budget. And so here we see on the left-hand side, income, on the right-hand side, spending, and then I asked somebody to see if their budget is balanced. So this can be helpful in a couple of instances. When might somebody pick a monthly budget over a cash flow budget? When might somebody pick? Oh, great. Yeah, and just that the cash flow would be helpful because farm income and expenses vary month to month. Yeah. Yes, Barb, absolutely. So if somebody gets paid once a month, it's really easy to use a monthly budget. So if somebody's employer pays them once a month, if they choose to, cash out their pay from various gig economy apps, if they're receiving benefits only, and those are all paid once a month, whether that's SSDI, general assistance, TANF, depending on the state. When else makes somebody choose a monthly budget? We also see this if somebody's considering taking a job to see if they're going to be able to make ends meet. So looking at what their anticipated net income is to see how it compares to their expenses. And it can also be helpful as sort of a thought activity to help somebody reverse budget what they might need to make. And that can be especially helpful with people who are currently unemployed, whether that's young people, folks reentering the workforce, or people who've been incarcerated. Starting with an estimate of expenses and then working their way backwards can be helpful. And so that's another time you could use this tool. So we'd love to use breakout rooms for just a few minutes. So if you haven't used them before, no worries. The Zoom is going to have a pop-up box, and you're just going to press the blue join button if you see in color, and it will bring you back to the main room. And we'd love for you just to chat about how you've used any of the tools if you have. And then if you haven't, that's okay. But we want you to think about when you might use a cash flow budget and when you might use a monthly budget, and sort of what are the pros and cons. And when we come back all together, we'd love to have you share in the chat about when you might use a cash flow versus a monthly budget and when you might pick monthly budget. So we'd love to just give you some opportunities to connect and hear about what other folks are doing. So I'm going to go ahead and activate those.
And Cassie, while you do that, I will allow everyone to unmute themselves while they're in the breakout rooms. So
Perfect.
it'll be a little bit easier to chat to each other that way.
Great. And it's not letting me not add co-hosts. So co-host, you don't have to join.
Okay, that's fine. Go ahead.
All right.
Yeah, so the rooms are open now, and you should have a notification on your screen that is saying you've been invited to the breakout room. Just click join the room and you should pop into that room.
Samantha, do you know if it defaults to 60 seconds before they come back?
It de- mm,
We'll find
I
out.
yeah, I don't know what it defaults to. What I have it set to is 10 seconds. When I
Oh,
close the rooms, 10 seconds, and then they automatically come in.
I'll give it another second then so that both people
Yeah.
can share.
Yeah, so just whenever you're ready for them to come back, just click close all rooms.
Okay. I'll give-
They'll be notified that the rooms are closing.
Great.
And then there'll be like a countdown, whatever it was set to.
Okay. Yeah, 60 seconds.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine. That'll just give them a minute to wrap up
To
if
wrap
they're in the
up.
middle. Yeah.
Welcome back. So for those of you that have already joined, tell us in the chat, what did you share in your groups? When did you use a cash flow? And when would you use a monthly budget? So what did you, no worries. Or maybe you would just step out, but for those of you who could participate, when would you use a cash flow and when would you use a monthly budget? Sounded like for farming situations, you would use a cash flow. Yeah, to help somebody visualize their spending. So cash flows can be really great for visual learners, and we have a tool adjusting their cash flow, which we aren't going to have time to cover today, but really helps people because it lays it out on a calendar. So for those more visual learning styles, that can be really helpful. When might you use a monthly budget? So someone would use cash flow to help people really understand where the money is going regularly. Great. So we have a lot of cash flow fans. If somebody's paid monthly, yeah. Also sometimes in emergent situations. So I've spent a lot of time working in shelters with folks who've experienced homelessness or violence. And sometimes you just don't have enough time. And so doing a monthly budget can be a little bit easier. Yeah, usually starting with the monthly budget to find out the big picture. I love that idea. And then diving in. Maybe if they don't have as many debts. Yeah, if they have sort of a simpler financial picture, then the monthly budget might, if somebody doesn't have a lot of variable expenses and they have one steady source of income, that can be helpful. Well, thanks. I hope you all enjoyed the opportunity to connect with each other. I'm going to, with youth. Yeah. So monthly budgets might be a new experience. Great. Yeah, and we really want to highlight that all of the Your Money, Your Goals tools and resources are very adaptable. So taking really what you think will work for the audience that you're working with, and using the rest in other settings are not at all. So definitely selecting based on the audience and making sure that you're asking for feedback. And again, we love feedback about the tools, good, bad, otherwise, requests for new tools, ideas, translation requests. So if you can email us those, that's really helpful. So I'm going to turn it over to Jill, who is going to talk to us about some additional resources and help us wrap up today's session. So Jill, over to you.
Great. Thanks so much. And I will mention regarding youth, we had a really interesting listening session yesterday with a group of youth leaders ages 16 to 22. And one thing that we heard was a real need for video content and short video clips, a lot of creativity around developing, engaging video clips for young people. So we're always curious if people have examples to share or good challenges for young people who are creating content. They can certainly pull from all of our content. None of this is copyrighted, and we love to see it used creatively. So I would love to, in a moment, come back to these questions about takeaways. But before I do, I wanted to just highlight a couple additional resources on our website and encourage you to take a look at consumerfinance.gov. We just went through another update to the website to make it a little more accessible to consumers, make it a little more direct to consumer, although it's still fairly heavy on technical information. There are a couple pages I did want to highlight. One is a variety of resources related to coronavirus pandemic financial protections. And then a second link I plugged in the chat, which is specifically related to protections for homeowners and renters, some protections related to the pandemic. And later in the series, we'll highlight some other resources related to debt and student debt resources, but there's a very rich selection of information there on the website at consumerfinance.gov. So I would love to go back to that question about takeaways, and just here in the chat, if you could let us know what is the most important takeaway from today's training, and also what is something you would like to learn more about. We would love to hear a little more about what aspects of this series are most useful to you and help shape our sessions going forward. So I see a couple comments coming in, helping to learn more about using tools and resources. I know in the chat room, some of this is brand new to people, so these are new resources. So always excited to share these with others. We will be tackling debt coming up. And then as you put your comments in the chat, if we could continue on, Cassie, to the Ask CFPB, just a reminder, this is a really helpful page where you can go with any basic financial questions and easily search. So especially for those of you who are newer to the topic or dealing with a sudden question and you want a good, reliable place to look it up, we encourage you to check out the Ask CFPB webpage. And then next slide, please. I did want to spend a little bit of time highlighting the ordering instructions. I did get a couple questions that I'll put in the chat, and please feel free to ask other questions in the chat right now. For ordering printed resources, we got a question about the non-bound materials to be used in correctional facilities. So I will put this link in the chat for anyone who wants to order booklets without the spiral binding. I'll include a direct link in the chat that will take you to all of those materials that are designed for correctional facilities. And if we could plug the Ask CFPB link in the chat, Cassie, could you add that again? And I'm looking for other questions coming in on the chat, but while I do so, I will mention someone had inquired about training slides. And we do have a recently revised set of 200 training slides, we pull from that deck for this type of training session, but we can make those available for you to use in your own training sessions. So we will find a way to get that out to you either by email or in a Dropbox to share it with you all. And you are welcome to use the content. The only request is that if you use the CFPB logo, we ask that you don't modify the content. But if you take our logo off, it's fine to adapt it as needed for your content and your audience. So we always encourage people to adapt to the audience. And we have training decks also available for the re-entry deck, and we'll have others coming soon for the disability deck. And looking for any other questions, or if anyone would like to come off mute. Any questions or requests for the upcoming sessions? We're happy to hear. And we'll work on getting those slides out to you all. And if we don't have more questions today, you feel free to email us directly. And again, just want to thank Samantha, Andrea, the hosts, Laura in Arkansas, Pam, our guest speaker, Suzanne, who's been involved throughout the process, and all of you across the country joining today. It's been great to hear how you're using this information. And I'll turn it back to Laura Hendricks for any other final thoughts or comments before we wrap up today.
Thanks, Jill. I wanted to say we have Suzanne Bartholomew coming up, speak as one of our extension educator speakers. We have Jesse Ketterman coming up. So thanks to all of those folks who volunteered. We're going to be talking about later in the week, we'll be talking more about some of the companion guides and other languages. So if you are interested in those, stay tuned to future days where we'll be talking about some of those specific topics, as well as looking at more of the tools and the modules that are in the Financial Empowerment Your Money, Your Goals toolkit. And then we'll also be talking about a little bit about branding and some of the co-branding opportunities that are available for some of these tools. Please feel free if you think of a question later. Most of you have my email address because you've received this meeting invitation from me. So feel free to reach out to me if you think of something later, and we will circle back around to presenting that question to our hosts on our next episode. So you can see Suzanne put another, our federal tax dollars at works. Yes, thanks everyone for that. So we will see you tomorrow, same time, same place.
Thank you all. Have a good day.